Everyone loves a good redemption arc. Some of the greatest stories ever told are redemption arcs. But who can be redeemed, and from what point can they be redeemed from? Boromir's attempt at taking the One Ring was swiftly redeemed by the fact that he selflessly sacrificed himself in an attempt to save Merry and Pippin. A short, simple redemption arc that's easy to get behind, because Boromir isn't a bad guy, nor has he committed any real evil deeds. However, pop culture has also defined Darth Vader as the classic example of a redemption arc. Odd though, isn't it? Does one good deed at the very end wipe away thousands of horrible deeds? That's for the audience to decide though. So, using the same logic here, could Sauron have been redeemed? It's worth getting into Sauron's motivations as a character, as it really helps frame why he did what he did. Sauron, once known as Myron, was a Maya in service to Aule, who valued order and efficiency above anything else. That's not necessarily a bad thing, except Myron took it to an extreme. Simply put, there was a lot of red tape and deliberation when it came to the Valar, but under Morgoth, there was no such constraints. Myron could do whatever he wanted, thus he ended up in Morgoth's service and was henceforth known as Sauron. This is kind of odd because Sauron and Morgoth's ideologies are somewhat fundamentally opposed. Morgoth is about chaos, his motivations are fairly simple. Whatever I can't create, I will destroy, and since he lacks the power of creation, he wants to destroy everything. He is the ultimate nihilist, pure chaos. Chaos and order don't work well together, but Sauron is willing to put this aside because he loves the power that comes along with being in service to Morgoth. This is probably his first moral downfall. He's Morgoth's right-hand man, his most trusted lieutenant, and despite his master's aspirations of, destroying everything, Sauron seems willing to ignore that as long as he can operate within his little bubble, at least for a while. But Sauron's service under Morgoth inevitably corrupts him. After all, how couldn't it? When you're hanging around the most evil being in Middle-earth, a bit of that's going to rub off on you. It further develops his negative traits such as pride and lust for power, and if you're pretty well learned about the Tolkienverse at this point, then you'd know that those two traits are big no-nos in Arda. They almost always lead to one's downfall. But moving beyond that, Sauron also develops a cruel streak. In the tale of Beren and Luthien, in which Sauron features prominently, he uses phantoms of Gorlim's dead wife as a way to trick Gorlim into betraying Barahir and his men. And later in the story, he feeds Beren's companions to werewolves one by one. In other words, Sauron isn't just a guy taking orders, he's doing his own thing, and he's doing it in an excessively evil way. Despite this, Sauron actually receives a shot at redemption at the end of the First Age. Following Morgoth's fall, Sauron solemnly renounces his evil deeds, and some say that this repentance was actually him being truthful. Others say he only did it because he was trying to save his own skin. We'll probably never know the truth. He tries to get a pardon from Eonwë, but Eonwë tells him that it's beyond his stature and that Sauron would need to seek forgiveness from the Valar. Afraid of any potential punishment, Sauron slinks away and vanishes into the vast expanses of Middle-earth. The fact that Sauron wasn't forcibly taken back to Valinor perhaps shows that the Valar were willing to give him a chance of redemption if he was willing to take it. After all, despite his misdeeds, Sauron too had been corrupted and deceived by Morgoth's lies, or at least that's what they thought. And it's true, Morgoth's influence made Sauron much worse than what he would have been, but how far can you push an excuse until it loses all meaning? So, at the beginning of the Second Age, with the absence of Morgoth, Sauron gets in touch with his roots, order. He's no longer second fiddle, and now he has the freedom to do what he wants, and after a while, he figures out what he wants to do. Having come to the conclusion that the Valar have once again abandoned Middle-earth, Sauron's pride grows, and he decides that it is his mandate to make Middle-earth as great as it possibly can be. That's great in quotation marks because Sauron still has plenty of evil and malice in his heart. Great to him probably isn't so great to a lot of other people. Eventually, Sauron's pride leads him to believe that he should rule Middle-earth as a king, and soon as a god. The men of Middle-earth are mostly easy to corrupt, having already been corrupted by Morgoth before, so Sauron achieves that fairly quickly. However, if Sauron wants true dominance, he needs to gain dominion over the elves. Sauron doesn't like the elves, but he respects their powers and abilities, and recognises that if he truly wants to make Middle-earth as great as possible, he needs them on his side. This is the motivation behind crafting the Rings of Power, to gain dominion over the elves. Of course, we know how that tale goes, and Sauron ultimately fails. Let's pause here. Can Sauron still be redeemed at this point? Well, I'd say yes. The Valar were willing to redeem him in the First Age, and up to this point of the Second Age, Sauron hasn't went beyond the point of no return. Sure, he has diabolical plans, and yes, attempted murder is almost as bad as actual murder, but the main point here is that Sauron is still being true to himself. That idea of order and control is still central to his actions, and he hasn't let those core principles get completely corrupted. Yet. While someone's values are still the same as they have always been, even if they go down the wrong path, you can still show them where they went wrong, because they probably still care about that. Let us not forget, Sauron's core beliefs were not necessarily bad to begin with. He just disagreed with the way the Valar did things, and because his core beliefs were not bad, it means he could still return to that original point. He could be brought around with moral reasoning, such as, if he desires order so badly, then how can he justify the destruction he uses to get there? After all, doesn't that go against his fundamental beliefs? And with no Morgoth around to coerce him, encourage him, or trap him, he is the master of his own destiny. He can still escape the trap that his former master fell for. So I would say at this point, even after crafting the Rings of Power, it might still be possible for Sauron to be redeemed. Unfortunately, I think this shot at redemption quickly passes. After the Rings of Power fail, Sauron throws aside any semblance of good he has left. And he doubles down on this. He tries to destroy all of the elves, and caught in the crossfire are many men. Pre-Númenóreans, Gwaithfarim, Northmen. Doesn't matter, he tries to destroy them too. The Gwaithfarim even welcomed Sauron as a liberator, and it didn't make a difference to him. When Durin's folk aids the elves, Sauron commands his minions to destroy them too, and when Númenor ultimately defeats Sauron at the Battle of the Gwathlo, Númenor earns his eternal hatred. Sauron isn't just about order and control anymore. No, his motives have changed. If he can't control it, then he will destroy it. Does that sound familiar? At this point, Sauron has attempted genocide, and yes, he did serve under a genocidal maniac in the past, so he was kind of parley to a lot of genocide himself, but carrying out orders and giving the orders is a little bit different. And going back to that, actually, this isn't even really attempted genocide. Many of these groups were almost entirely wiped out. That's actual genocide. And when you're committing genocide, it suddenly becomes a lot more difficult to redeem you, especially when said genocide involves people who did absolutely nothing wrong to you. The Gwaithfarim did nothing except exist. This is a permanent change for Sauron. He becomes a tyrannical overlord, corrupting and enslaving many of the men of the East and South. At the start, he actually taught these men the crafts of metalwork and stonework in an attempt to get on their good side. And yes, there were ulterior motives here, but now he doesn't care at all. He doesn't even care about revealing his true evil self. And now Nirn is filled with slaves from these conquered peoples. We see Sauron's continued fall into darkness reflected in his later actions. His corruption of Númenor is taken to the absolute extremities of evil, where even human sacrifice is practiced, and once again, human sacrifice, that's not really redeemable. And even when Sauron is the power behind the throne, he still convinces Ar-Pharazôn to sail west, knowing full well that there would be punishment from Ilúvatar. Sauron doesn't know to what extremes, to be fair, but this was done entirely out of spite, angry at his humiliation at the hands of Ar-Pharazôn's army. Despite being in full control of Númenor at this point, Sauron lets his malice take control, and he promptly loses his new toy when it gets sunk beneath the ocean. Sauron's fall into true evil is then reflected when he loses the ability to shapeshift into a fair form. He's stuck in the form of a Dark Lord, that which reflects the evil within his heart. Much like Morgoth was stuck in the form of a Dark Lord too. Thus, in the Third Age, we see that Sauron has become much more similar to Morgoth than he ever was before. He does not want to destroy everything, and he still values order, but at the same time, he destroys and corrupts out of pure hatred. He's driven by anger and malice, and at the point of his final destruction, there's pretty much no good left within him. So perhaps Sauron truly was redeemable at the end of the First Age, and even through the Second Age up until the War of the Elves and Sauron. He had committed plenty of evil in his time, but he had a chance, perhaps several chances, to turn his back on evil, and he ignored every single one. Sauron by the end of the Third Age was irredeemable. His pride, his arrogance, and his lust for power had grown so great that it could only lead down one path, a downward spiral towards the darkest pits of evil, the same path that Morgoth took. And although Sauron perhaps never ended up quite as bad as his master, Well, when arguing between fantasy Hitler and fantasy Stalin, what difference does it make? Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. I am sorry to any subscribers to the Sauron did nothing wrong theory, especially if I've burst your bubble. Don't worry, you can always migrate to Morgoth did nothing wrong, or Feanor did nothing wrong. Both would be glad to have you, and I haven't done a video on those two things yet, so live in your little Sauron bubble for a while. Thank you, farewell, and remember, it's hip to be evil. Wait, forget I said that.